sectors, so transport, finance, energy, industrial commodities, agriculture, manufacturing. Everything that we understand about all six is dependent upon the idea of global security. And so you remove the global security and all six of them have to unwind and reform in different ways. So really it's kind of pick your poison. With transport, long haul goes out the window. That's an end to, among other things, super tankers. So if you are getting your oil from 3,000 or more miles away, you're out of luck. Ships are going to have to be smaller and go faster because the concentrated risk that a giant container vessel has, you lose one of those and the shipping company goes away. If you're doing smaller tankers or smaller ships that are going faster, they can't carry as much, you just lost most intermediate goods trade. That's an end to electronics manufacturing in its current form. So you can play this on really any topic that you want, but the structures that have all held it together and made it work are dependent upon the ceiling not falling, and it's falling. The math is going to be different for everybody. Like take Latvia. Latvia has the capacity to do this. All they have to do is grab one shuttle tanker as it's leaving St. Petersburg. That would do it. And the Latvians have already managed to wean themselves off of Russian crude, and while it would crush most of their European partners, they would see the destruction of the primary income stream for Russia as an unalloyed good. Or consider the Americans. We're self-sufficient. We have the capacity of putting a wall around our energy exports so they stay at home. So we could actually see energy prices in the U.S. go down because of this. But then the rest of the world would lose access to Russian and American crude at the same time. So everyone has their own math to run. And a lot of it is going to depend upon how everyone interprets the loyalty or the actions of their allies. So, I mean, look at Germany. The Russians are in the process of jerking with the Germans on natural gas. And, you know, for those of us and the rest of the world, like, yeah, natural gas, it's an energy source, whatever, no biggie. That's not what it is in Germany. The entire German economy is based on taking cheap Russian gas, processing it into petrochemicals, and then using those inputs in their entire manufacturing sector. If they lose that gas, it's not just that electricity prices go off, it's that the German manufacturing model fails. So the Germans are being presented with the choice: leave the coalition and keep the lights on, or lose your gas and no longer be modern. So what's more important to the Germans, being Western or being modern? That's a shit choice, but it has consequences and people will judge them based on what they do. The core idea that without energy none of this works is solid. We've spent the last 70 years bringing the energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed, which means primarily from the Middle East to Europe and East Asia. North America is more or less a self-contained component, even was before the shale revolution. Now it certainly is. That was one of the prices the Americans paid in order to get their alliance, is making sure the energy would flow. In the environment we're in now, we're at a risk of losing all Russian crude. Now, I've always thought this was going to happen eventually. I didn't think it was going to happen this soon. Russian crude is what has largely fueled the global economic expansion since '92. Because when the Soviet system collapsed, their energy production did not, and all of their commodities were just dumped on the international market. And that has kept prices relatively low for 35 years. That period is now closing. And so we're going to lose 5% of global crude, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you remember that energy demand is inelastic. And a 5% loss in crude can easily generate a tripling in price. So an energy-induced depression that is broadly global in scope will start because of the Ukraine war at some point. And this is probably the reason that no one's gone after that raft yet, because that would be the death blow for the Russian energy sector. There are countries that were damaged by globalization. The empire specifically, if you were a country that had a pretty good geography at the start of this, then when the Americans came through and changed the rules so that everyone can play, you saw a massive drop in your overall power. If you are one of those countries and you have a positive demographic structure, you could actually make a lot of hay out of what's coming, because you could, I don't want to use the word imperial, neo-imperial might be the right word. You can definitely make a bid for your own neighborhood. So the two countries that are on the top of my list as regards that are Turkey and France. Decent demographics, good manufacturing base, largely not integrated into their neighborhoods economically. The French actually trade less with the EU than the Brits do. And I can see part of Western Europe becoming part of a French fiefdom, and obviously parts of the Middle East for Turkey. I would have put Japan on that list, but the Japanese managed to cut a deal with both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which makes the Japanese the only people who have been able to get on with both sides of the American spectrum of late. So I think they've basically agreed to partner up with the U.S. rather than go their own way, which I think will be the best for everyone in the long term, unless you're Chinese, of course.
Well, you can have terminal deindustrialization and you can have terminal depopulation. 50 years on, 75 years on from globalization, number of countries whose demographic profile has gone terminal. Whenever you look at a profile, what it should be, what is normal, is a lot of children, fewer teenagers, fewer 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and so on, and mixed pyramid. But there are a huge number of countries where it's more like this, with a small base of children then going up, and there's actually more elderly than there are workers. We're on the verge of that in many places. Those are countries who have aged past the point of any hope of a demographic resurgence. So this is Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Germany, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, Italy, Belgium, and just to give you a quick sampling. These are all countries that we know are going to vanish over the course of the next century because they just won't have people. Unless they greatly redefine what their nationality means, like, say, Australia or Canada have, there's really no way out. Countries that are terminal in terms of industrialization. These are countries where the resources don't just come from not within their own borders, but from a different continent. And they lack the military capacity to secure those things for themselves, or even to secure the sea lanes that are necessary for civilian shipping to come and go. China is far and away at the top of the list. Germany is far and away number 2. This is not a new problem for the Germans. We've seen this multiple times throughout their history, that they have the industry and they've got the population, they've got the skills, but they don't have the inputs in the market. And under NATO and the EU, the Germans haven't had to go all Highlander on everybody in order to get that. But you break down American support or European collegiality, and that kind of goes away. So we're going to have an interesting conversation here this summer when the Russians are offering the Germans energy they need to keep going for a price when it comes to cooperation or lack thereof in the Ukraine war. And we're going to see a lot of things challenged, because right now Europe is more united than it has been since the Treaty of Westphalia. I mean, this is really weird. We've never seen this level of agreement without first having the bottom fall out. But Ukraine and the Americans being involved in the Ukraine war has generated a lot of solidarity. But as the Russian energy stops flowing for a mix of reasons, the Russians will have the option for keeping Germany supplied. Their pipeline goes a different route, goes under the water directly to Germany. And so Germany will have a choice between having energy and electricity and industry and partnering with Russia, or not, and deindustrializing. So we're going to have a lot of countries in that general situation with some hard choices to make this year. Population is a big part of that, because if you run out of people in their 20s and 30s, you've lost your consumption base, and your only way to keep the system running is to export. So this is the Japanese, the Korean, and the German model. But if you break down global trade, whether it's because the Americans go their own way, or populism bursts up in a lot of places, or you have a heavily mercantilist country like China, or a war like what's going on in Russia, all of that breaks supply chains and makes it difficult, if not impossible, for countries to get the raw materials they need to keep an industrialized system going. One of the great achievements of globalization is about bringing the inputs, food, energy, raw materials, to every country of the world who wants to play, which is every country of the world pretty much. But if you break down the supply systems, the technologies of industrialization are not sustainable without those inputs. So we're going to see large portions of this world, China is the country I'm most concerned about, deindustrializing as they simply can no longer maintain the inputs that make modern life possible. And keep in mind that 2 of the aspects of modern life are electricity and food.